Hey everyone, Adam here, So Was Your Podcast. I got to sit down with Christopher Thomas, who is an incredibly well accomplished composer for movies, theme parks. I even believe he did some video game work. Music is definitely not my area of expertise. It's my area of barely understanding. I don't even think I'm good at listening to music. So, me and Christopher Thomas do a deep dive. He was very open to all sorts of questions. I was a little all over the place, but I just wanted to absorb his knowledge. It was a fantastic interview. I was super energized by him, and I will never listen to a score in a movie the same way again. He just gives so much insight on it. Check out the interview. It's fantastic. Hey everyone, Adam here, So Was Your Podcast. I'm sitting down with Christopher Thomas, who is a very well accomplished composer. How you doing, Christopher?
Good. How are you?
Doing good. I appreciate you taking the time to come on. This should be fun.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to be here.
I've actually never gotten to talk to a composer, so I'm probably going to have a lot of questions that are not very specific, and I might be a little bit all over the place, just to give you a heads up.
Well, those are usually the most fun questions. We tend to go interesting places and not just the usual loop of questioning. So
yeah, your same boilerplate questions you get every interview.
Yeah.
There might be some of those, but
yeah, those are funny too.
All right. Well, the first where I like to start with creative people is what got you into your field. So for you, what got you into music composing? I'm sure there's a lot there.
Gosh, yeah, I was really lucky to come from a musical family. So over the years, as I got to know more musicians and composers, I realized my background was really the exception than the rule. Most people's families try to talk you out of going into the music business. Like, you have good grades, you could be a doctor, you could be an engineer. Why music? And I came from a family where it was more like, if you really want to be a doctor, go for it. We'll support that, but we'll support this too. And both my parents are musicians. And so I had a lot of musical influence at home, when I was practicing. So I picked up cello as my primary instrument. And so that was what I trained on. And I knew that was going to be my best chance of getting a scholarship. Because I grew up in a little farm town out in Eastern Oregon. And I figured the cello was my ticket into a life in music. And so I practiced like crazy. And I had parents who were supportive and actually helped me learn to practice better. So, over the years, I loved music, and it was the only thing I was really good at. But my other obsession in life was cinema. I just couldn't get enough of film. And when I was a kid, filmmakers like Alfred Hitchcock, Fellini, Truffaut, Akira Kurosawa, and then some newer directors at the time like Tim Burton, were sort of my influences. I just couldn't get enough of their movies. And I began to notice these names attached to the music on all of them. I noticed, in Kurosawa movies, there's this Toru Takemitsu guy, or with Tim Burton, there's this Danny Elfman guy writing music, or with Alfred Hitchcock, it was Bernard Herrmann. And with Fellini, you got Nino Rota. And I began to really notice, I think, these aren't really the popular names in film music right now today, but they were the offbeat thinkers who I was really attracted to. I just never had a taste for fads or trends, and I really liked some of these wacky cats who were just exploring strange sounds, and I kind of wanted to be more like them. And so for me, my musical formation when I started writing music was very much attached to these film composers and who were scoring these classic movies. And they were sort of my guiding light into a career in film music.
That's awesome that it clicked with you so young to look up. I don't think I knew that Danny Elfman did, say, Batman '89.
Yeah.
Until, 5 years ago. And I watched that movie every week when I was a kid. I didn't put that together. So it's really cool that you found it so early.
Yeah, I think my obsession was movies, but my ears were just dialed into music. It was just natural to me. And at one point, I think I was probably in fifth grade, I remember really beginning to notice the names of these composers attached to the films that resonated with me. So yeah, so movies and music have always been one and the same.
That's really awesome. Before we even get to movies, though, What about the cello specifically? Like that's not an easy place to start from what I know.
Yeah, strings are a bit brutal. Everyone thinks it's all the fancy stuff in your left hand that's tricky, but really it's the bowing in the right hand where 99% of your work goes into. That's actually the most unwieldy part of the string instrument. And the cello wasn't something I gravitated to, because it was what I wanted to play. I fell into the cello and it just happened to stick. And it was lucky that it did, because I was in fourth grade, I remember, and that's about when you start encouraging kids to start playing a string instrument. And I was sent home with a little pamphlet, and my parents were like, you should try a string instrument. And in the pamphlet, there were little pictures of the violin, the viola, cello, bass, and they all looked the same. They were just different sizes. They just got bigger. And I just thought, I don't really know. And then I looked at the cover of this pamphlet, and there was a picture of a grasshopper dancing around playing a cello. And I thought, you know what? I'll play whatever that one is. So I signed up for the cello. Yeah. And that was how I started the cello, was I saw this picture of a grasshopper and playing the cello, and it just happened to stick. And as I got further into studying cello, I realized the cello was getting me into like string orchestras, the local symphony orchestra, and I was accompanying different ensembles, and where other composers on the outside were trying to write music and then convince groups to play. I noticed no one was ever interested in playing new music if an outsider asked them to do it. But whenever I would bring music to a rehearsal, say, hey, everyone, can you stick around for 15 minutes? I brought a little bit of recording setup. Can you run through one of my new pieces? And people say, oh, yeah, sure. And I had all the musicians I could ever use to build my demo reel. So I started taking the cello more seriously, because as a composer, I knew all the way through college it was going to get me into all the good orchestras and groups, right, to have my pick of the best players to build my portfolio. And that's how I actually started. And that's how the cello transitioned me to film music, was it allowed me to build a big cinematic portfolio of full orchestra music that I recorded for free.
That is
because
so
I was
clever.
in the group. Yeah, so that was what it ended up doing for me. Yeah,
that's awesome. You kind of backdoored your way into having a full orchestra at your disposal multiple times.
Yeah, many times.
That's really cool. So your parents were more traditionally trained in music, I guess would be the term. Like you weren't like, I want to be a drummer, I'm going to play electric guitar in fourth grade, which I would guess a lot of kids, that's the route they go.
Mostly, yeah. My parents are classically trained vocalists. So, and my dad was a choir director before he started a company outside of music. So they were vocalists, and my mom played piano. We had a grand piano at home, and that's what I started on. Yeah.
Yeah, piano seems to be the way in for a lot of people.
And I did study piano through high school and into college as well, but it was more my tool as a composer. I could smash my hands down and hear everything going on in my head and find notes. But I knew the cello was my ticket to starting further, my career, though. Yeah.
Because there was, I guess, a need for the cello specifically that people had. That's cool that you fell into it, but also didn't, because you saw that and like it was I can't even think of the word. It was like a tactful move to get in.
It became one, yeah. And luckily in film music, everybody loves the sound of the cello. So if when I was new in film music and I was working on a lot of indie features that didn't have much budget, people thought, oh gosh, we can afford some new music, but we can't afford that much. And I was always able to bring piano and cello for no additional cost.
Okay.
And nobody dislikes the sound of those. And the cello sits in picture really nicely, and it tends not to compete with people's speaking voices much. And so it's like the perfect blending instrument for film. And so it also helped me, even after that transition into film, it was just so adaptable for film that it was just really convenient to not have to charge filmmakers anymore for solos. Yeah,
I'm sure they like that.
Yeah, that was also a good thing. Yeah.
So you start with piano, then you move to the cello, and you took that very seriously, took it pretty far. Yeah. How do you go from playing an instrument or two to I'm going to compose this orchestral piece?
Yeah. So in the background of all that cello practicing, I was also beginning to write my ideas down. And I was, as I got into, junior high through high school, I realized all those groups I was playing in would be my test run as a composer. There was a local symphony I was playing with, and I would test out writing bigger orchestral sounds for them, because I would be like, oh, we've got a handful of brass and winds and some strings. I'm going to try to write something that might work for them. And I would ask if they could read through my stuff, and they would. So I had a little test orchestra. And since I wasn't growing up in a really big city where their time was at a premium, it was all just local people playing. They were like, oh, sure, yeah, we'll try your stuff. And there was just no hurry. And there was no other composers competing for that space. There was nobody writing for them. And so it was kind of novel for everybody. And then my high school orchestra and choir and bands were my laboratory. And I was playing in all these different groups. And every term I would write several new pieces for all of them. And they would try them out. And the ones that worked well, they would hold on, rehearse, and put it on a concert too. So I would get these performances. And so
that's cool.
I was testing it as we went. And that transitioned into me reaching out to colleges around the Pacific Northwest. Because there weren't any film departments anywhere near where I grew up, but I was within several hours of a number of universities that had theater and film departments, and I just offered my services for free. And so I started scoring my first indie films and doing stage scores as well. Around my sophomore year in high school, I started offering that. Wow. And I was getting several college productions a year. So I was beginning to test out my chops as a composer then.
That's early.
It was very early. Yeah. I was just back when I was stopwatch timing against VHS tapes, watching people rehearse and trying to figure out how many measures of music could fit between those points and stuff like that. It was my first run at that. Yeah.
That's awesome. Was it the piano that helped you be able to write music?
Yes, absolutely. Without that, I don't know what I would have done.
Yeah. The way I understand it is kind of like learning the piano is like learning Latin, and then you could pick up all the other Romance languages.
Yeah. French, Spanish, and Italian are just a small step away from that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it is. It's the instrument of choice for any composer. I mean, every composer in history, more or less, was a very good pianist in one way or another. Some aren't. And it's increasingly common to not have to be a good pianist anymore. And there's so much digital technology that allows you to click in notes and just hear it play back at you. So the barrier of entry, sorry, I'm looking at my piano over in that corner. That barrier of entry isn't necessarily there the way it used to be.
Okay, that's interesting. It's good. Good to know, but also seems like it's a lost art or becoming a lost art in a way.
Yeah, there is a bit of a divide between being a good pianist and having a career as a composer. You can't really have a career as a composer without some piano chops. And a lot of newer film composers come in having played in a band or have done something else with almost no piano chops, and they have to learn to get pretty good at it. Because you really can't do big orchestral mock-ups in a computer without being able to punch in the parts on the keyboard. And so you have to have a certain amount, or at least pick it up as you go. But gosh, it's a really big help to have studied it for 20 years first. I'm grateful that my fingers know my way around. So yeah.
That's very cool. It's really interesting because this is a whole new world to me. And I've always been in a film, but this side of it is fascinating because I'm just so not in tune with it, but I'd like to understand it. So this is really, really cool.
And nobody else asks questions that tend to go this deep either. By asking some of these, the way you're approaching some of this is actually opening up material I almost never get to talk about. So that
good.
Actually getting a much more intimate insight into this side of music that most people don't talk about. So this is actually good stuff. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. Okay. So you're a sophomore in high school composing for colleges, universities, theater departments. How does that take the leap to, I guess it would be the next stage, but it's not like TV is ahead of theater, but you know what I mean? The next phase of your career.
Yeah.
I guess before that, did you compose all through your college?
I did. So when I got to school, I was still studying cello for a little while longer, but I was officially a composition student. And so I was finally just primarily a composer. And but I also knew that if I were going to make the next advance in my career, I would need to continue working and building some credits as a film composer. There was just no time to waste. And so by the time I finished high school, I had already scored my first small indie feature that, had played at, I know it went to Tribeca, Toronto, and several other festivals.
Wow.
I finally clawed my way into my first film that started really doing the rounds. And I had,
you say finally, but you were like 17.
Yeah, I was like 17 or 18. Yeah, but I was aiming for something like that by the time I left for college. And over the summer before I left, I actually scored that project. So I just finished it in time before leaving, and just using all local musicians where I grew up, and just slapping that recording together in a way that I'm just ashamed of now, but I didn't know any better at the time. But then, when I was in college, I started thinking, okay, well, I'm at the university now. I wonder who's doing interesting things. And I started hearing that it wasn't really the film and media department, but the journalism department had a few students coming along who had just locked in some deals with PBS and Oregon Public Broadcasting at the time. And I knew they were filming some documentaries that were going out for national airtime. And I introduced myself to the department. I said, hey, I'm a composition student here, and I'm willing to do whatever I need to help you get a good original score for this. And I've got a whole music department worth of players who I'm sure could help us out. And that's just what happened. I asked a bunch of musicians to join me, and everyone was happy to volunteer for it. And the filmmakers said, sure, let's go ahead and do this. And I partnered up with another local college that had a recording stage in a really beautiful facility. And I just had all the musicians meet me there. I was composing new music timed up against a picture, and we would just spend a day recording a handful of tracks. I'd go away, write more, we'd all come back. And then I had my first PBS films come out while I was doing my undergrad years. And during that time, I was trying to get other local symphony orchestras around the Northwest to perform some of my concert works. And I was trying to build this portfolio so that after college, I would be able to say, hey, look, I've done some things. You can trust me to score your film. And it was that portfolio that got me into USC's Scoring for Motion Pictures program. And when I got to Los Angeles and started at USC, that program put me in direct contact with more A-list film composers who brought me in as an intern to their TV shows they were working on. And they were giving me more and more responsibilities. And I only got those gigs based on that portfolio I was building through college. And so each little step moved into the next thing, all the way into Los Angeles, where suddenly I was trusted enough to be an arranger or a conductor for a TV show or somebody's video game or independent film. And began to prove myself little by little in Los Angeles until I was finally getting passed off to score the whole film for somebody. And so it's just an incremental process. Yeah.
It doesn't even sound that incremental. It sounds like leaps and bounds, but I'm sure when you were living it, it felt incremental.
Day to day, it just felt like an eternity. And these are just the little victories on the surface of just a graveyard of missed and botched opportunities that I didn't know how to handle along the way too. So,
right.
But you have to get shot down a whole lot before you have any one advance. Right.
Absolutely.
And so maybe it was more leaps and bounds than I realized, but it sure felt like a lot of failure before that point.
Right.
So, yeah.
In college, did you find, because you talked really early on in our discussion here that you liked these composers who were not necessarily the fad of the day. Yeah. Did you find that college was maybe not stifling your creativity, because that sounds like it was mean,
right?
But almost downplaying that to be like, this is what we're doing right now. This is what the studios want right now. That
became more of an issue, I think, when I got to LA. And I had to navigate for the first time the demands of what the industry was asking for versus me trying to maintain something of my own personality, to not just get lost, to not just homogenize into the middle and just be one of 10,000 composers doing the exact same thing, competing for the same kinds of jobs. And it was hard to do. And I lost that battle most of the time until my career grew enough where I could start being more selective and assert myself a little more forcefully. But college was more like training you to be a more intellectual concert composer. They were trying to get me to forget about the film stuff and just concentrate on going very deep into the craft, and telling me, later on you can go back into that world, but you're here to get your degrees, improve you're competent to handle all kinds of musical demands. And it was actually a good thing, because if left to my own devices, I would have maybe taken a much more narrow interest in what I wanted to do as a composer, where college forced me to become a whole lot of different composers and really learn so many different harmonic languages and orchestrational languages that I never would have encountered otherwise. And it made me really stretch a bit, to where now I feel like anybody could ask me for just about anything. And I have the chops to know just how to put it together. So that forceful training was actually a good thing. But it was the demand of the industry once I was in LA, where they were like, sound like this. We need somebody, we can't afford Hans Zimmer, so we want you to become Hans Zimmer for this film. And that was the first major battle. And it was hard to get over that period into my own place,
Yeah, now that you say it that way, that does seem like that would be the obvious thing, where they're like, hey, make it sound like this. And you're like, yeah, but I can do. And you're like, no, make it sound like this, because that's Hollywood.
Yeah, and my other issue with that ended up, I think the more salient problem was sometimes I would get a film come in, and what I would see on screen was incredibly fresh and unique. What they had shot, just conceptually, story-wise, visually, it was so evocative and unusual and special. And then someone would say, great, copy this other person's sound down to the note. I mean, just maybe borderline to the point where you may or may not get sued over this. And I thought, you've created something remarkable. And that person's sound has nothing to do with what you've made. I know you want to rely on something you understand and know as a safety mechanism of sorts. Maybe you'll feel a little more confident putting this new piece out there, but it's like, you should trust yourself. It's great what you've done, and it needs something new. Like, somebody else's thing doesn't match. You need a fresh take, because everything I need to find a brand new sound is all over picture. Like the way you use colors in your theme, the way you have this rhythm in your edit speaks musically to me. That the space you used between shots tells me how I can widen out the size of my orchestration. Like, everything I need to write something very special is right here. Like, don't make me copy somebody else. And every now and again, somebody would say, fair enough, let's see what you've got. And often when they would say that, the new thing would usually win. They would immediately be like, right, now I see what you mean. There is something special in this picture. But the people who would say, no, we just need somebody else's thing. Let's not go there. And that's when I knew I was in for a really bad ride. And I had to walk off a couple films because of that. It was like, no, we're going to get sued. You're having me change things in the music. And I realized you're making me shift one note at a time. And now it's becoming that other person's melody. It's like, I can't do it.
Right. Yeah. They'll throw in those algorithms, and plus your artistic integrity is like, if you want me to just be a computer, go do that somewhere else. Like, you don't need me for that. No,
you really don't. Just go license the music.
Right. Put a GarageBand and take it down a note.
Yeah. Maybe you'll fool the internet algorithms just enough. But critically, nobody's going to be fooled. They'll know what that's from. And I can't associate myself. Yeah.
Yeah. And for you, I imagine that's the equivalent of like, I'm not trying to knock anyone's profession, but like data entry. It's like, I'm punching a clock, I'm doing my 9 to 5, I'm just going through the motions.
Yeah. And it can really set you back. Once you really begin to homogenize into other people's sounds or follow other trends, then you've jumped in a stream of tens of thousands of people replicating the same thing and you've achieved mass invisibility. Like
Right.
now you've become replaceable by any one of 10,000 other people. And I realized, and over the years I kept realizing, now wait, people I always looked up to were just allergic to trends. Whenever the industry was going one way, they would go the opposite. I mean, forcefully fight upstream, and they always stood out. They found a way to treat what that movie needed with musically with a very fresh and different thing. And everybody couldn't help but notice. And the times I've noted, and over my years doing this, I've noticed just the same thing. Anytime a filmmaker trusts me enough to take the leash off and say, you know what, go ahead. Whatever's truly unique about yourself, find its place in this film. It's rare a filmmaker gives you that sort of permission. That's a big risk. And I don't take that responsibility lightly. In fact, I was paralyzed with fear for the first 2 or 3 weeks of that score until they hear something that they're happy with. But those are the scores that end up getting me 100 new calls to do new work. People come to me saying, whoa, whatever happened in that film, we want more of that. And my career has advanced much farther every time somebody lets me do that. And I've gotten to this point where I'm beginning to just not really take on new projects unless somebody comes to me for that sound that I do. And I'd rather establish myself in my own place. I'm still fighting trends, and I've still got decades more of this battle to go. So.
Yeah, it's probably never ending, but that's really cool. You're mostly able to stick to your guns and do your thing.
It's getting better. Yeah.
Yeah. Going back to college, when you said you kind of not put it aside, but you weren't focused on the cello or the piano, and you were a composing student, you could not have stopped playing instruments, I wouldn't think.
Yeah, I did have scholarships to continue playing cello. And so I couldn't, the rules were, there was a point I could stop taking lessons and studying full-time, like a second full-time schedule, but I had to start doing more chamber music, and I had to keep playing with a symphony and then a few other groups. So I wasn't so much of a practicing soloist, but I was more entrenched in the big ensembles where I was playing. But that really ended as soon as I was done with my undergrad degrees. And then when I went to USC, it was like the end of the cello for me for about 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And then I decided to pick it back up again for myself. And I'm still playing more these days, but
that's good. Yeah.
I was just aching for 10 years, just missing it. I thought it was just the thing I needed to get me to that final phase. And then I would just leave it and move on. But once you spend more than 20 years of your life, just every day, just in this Zen mode, connecting with an instrument like that, when you stop like that, it's not like you can. It was painful.
Yeah, it's
and
part
I just
of your DNA.
Constantly missed it. Yeah, it was. And then I started picking it up again and playing with a few small orchestras around Los Angeles, just sitting, kind of hiding out in the cello sections during some concerts. I just realized, whoa, I need this in my life. And I've picked it up again since. So
it's interesting. Yeah. I would not have guessed that a decade would have gone by since you were so ingrained with it, but I guess life gets in the way.
Yeah. And just the rush of that transition into that full-time life in Los Angeles. And just how crazy it is when you start in the film business. It was so intimidating and exhausting. There was no room for anything in my life, and I had to grow to a place where I could manage life and film. And it was around that time I realized, oh, what am I doing? I miss my cello.
Yeah, I need to do some of this for me. Can't overwork.
Yeah, exactly.
When you're composing, I don't know if you have any experience with, say, brass instruments or drum, whatever it is, percussion. Do you find it harder to write for the sections you have less experience? Clearly, strings.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. The other part of my life, performance-wise, that I've spent a lot of time in is percussion. So rhythm sections, and I'm still a big percussion nut. And I spent a lot of years playing in what's called a Balinese gamelan orchestra. In fact, if I tip my screen just a little, you can see one of my Balinese instruments back in the corner there. And that's one of my little Indonesian babies there. And and I've always played a lot of mallet instruments and a lot of like big drum section stuff. And I don't know what it is. I just really love that part of the orchestra. But yeah, but to your question, so yeah, I cannot play a wind or a brass instrument. I have no chops for it whatsoever. But you do study orchestration in college, and you spend a lot of time learning about every instrument and every section, like its mechanics, where its like kind of natural positions are, and how you have to alter stuff to get different notes. And you begin to develop a sense of, a French horn tends to operate this way. A flute can make leaps from there to there with no issue whatsoever. But you do that with a horn, you're going to get this sloppy mess. You'll learn what the ranges are, and then you spend even more years studying the literature for that instrument. It's like, okay, let's look at all the major concertos for horn and just look at how all the major composers tend to use them. And for me, I have the advantage of playing in symphony orchestras my whole life. So my ears are just completely accustomed to hearing horns every day, operate. And so when I write for horn, I write things that I know are native to like how they always sound and play. And whenever I write for a clarinet or a flute, like I understand on paper how they function, and I've written for them so many times, I've gotten used to it. But I've also spent so much of my life in symphony orchestras, whether as the composer and the conductor or as a cellist in rehearsal for 3 hours every other day, just listening to them work. And my ears just know what they need to do. But then I put in the formal years training. And whenever I'm not sure about what I'm writing, I'll take a picture and I'll send it to a friend and be like, hey, clarinet playing friend, I want to do something that looks like this. Am I crazy, or is there a way we can modify that? Because all I need is that flourish of notes. The pitches may not even matter. I kind of just needed to go, just a quick little run. Is this okay? And they'll say, great, the notes are all right, but that leap from there to there, in fact, can you just change that note to something else in that chord? And then we can absolutely make all of those notes in that run. And it's like, oh, yeah, I'm happy with that. And they'll advise me. And then, we go to a session and I tend to consult with people in advance. And then when I get to these orchestra recordings, a lot of the players are like, wow, gosh, I thought the music was going to go like this, but everything was just right under my fingers when I was playing my horn solo. And, string players like, wow, it's like a string player wrote these. And I try to make sure people look over parts before I record them so that players feel comfortable with it. And so consulting with your friends, I think, is another safeguard. So I think between just the years of exposure, the years of formal orchestration training, and then having real professionals just take a look at the weird spots, help shore up against doing awkward things in recordings.
Yeah, that's cool. There's just so much to this. I'm having a hard time even wrapping my head around what you do, like how you manage to keep it all straight.
Yeah, years of training.
Living it.
Just every day. Yeah.
That's really cool though. It's fascinating. So you do college, a lot of productions and a lot of orchestra work. Also, you get to LA where you had it sounds like big breaks, but you were probably knocking on doors and having doors shut in your face every day. And
that too.
Yeah, I'm sure it wasn't the easiest thing. Like you said, we're kind of playing the highlights.
Yeah.
Yep. Sorry.
No.
Oh, okay.
I was just agreeing.
I was just kind of, recentering. So when you get a job for a TV show, movie, probably commercials, even the same. I'm not actually sure if you've done commercial. I don't remember if you said so. Yeah. How does it start? I mean, obviously you see what they have filmed before you compose.
Yeah.
Do you write like, I'm just going to write like a really basic piano thing, bring it in, see if we're on the same page? Or do you go full bore orchestra right off the bat?
Yeah. So one thing that's changed over time is that dynamic of what you present to somebody. So, and this transition was happening when I was in LA. It had already kind of gone to the side where it's like you present more fully fleshed out digital mock-ups of how things go. But it was still a little bit of that time where you could still kind of sit at a piano and jam out some ideas with a filmmaker next to you and just kind of talk things over. Because mock-ups were the sounds are progressing pretty fast, but not everyone had all that stuff yet. And it was just about to become fully available or easily available for everybody. And so my first few projects were a bit of a mix where I had some really primitive synth technology I was doing that with, but it was still half like sitting at a piano, and then they would have to trust me a little bit at the recording. And so kind of from that point backward, that was what film history was like. Miklos Roja and Franz Waxman, would have to just put up, just let the film run on a stage and sit at a piano and kind of jam out their ideas and kind of sing along with themselves. Like, here's this chord and I'm going to sing a French horn part, la, 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 la. Again, and just they'd watch the movie and the filmmakers would just be like, yeah, I'm seeing where you're going, close enough. Let's just roll with that. And then it wasn't until the recording they would actually hear what really happened. And sometimes it was like, oh, that's fantastic. And sometimes the stories of some composers who are alive now who started on the other side of that transition before mock-ups. And they said, and some of my teachers were in this generation, they said every now and again they'd be conducting a big orchestra and they were just thrilled with what they heard. They looked back to the booth and everyone just had their faces in their hands doing this, like,
oh no.
Well, that was the budget. I guess no one's happy, but what are they going to do? And that was how you found out if the music worked. And now it's like, the more or less picture locked cut is done. They stamp a time code, or they put a time code stamp on there, so everyone's looking at the same hour, minute, second frame, and the sound guys are all lining up all the Foley, ADR, dialogue stuff against that time code, and I'm locking musical events right on frames of film. And it's like, okay, at this tempo, I can hit that mark and I have to adjust the tempo just slightly. And then I'll hit that cut there. And you're drawing these tempo and meter maps out over picture to figure out, okay, what's a good speed for the scene? And somewhere around these tempos, if I keep adjusting them, I'll end up hitting all the moments I need to. And then from there, it's like I import that into a software called Logic Pro. And Logic is like a widely available piece of software where you can open just countless MIDI tracks where I can load the sound of a violin section, a viola section, horns, choir, percussion. And you have this big digital orchestra at your fingertips, and I hit record. It's like, okay, flute part, and I'll just start playing in all my flute parts just by hand on the piano, just with my digital flute. And then it's like next part, clarinets, oboes, all the way through the strings, percussion, choir. And I've got this big, fully orchestrated mock-up symphony playing right against the timed film. So a filmmaker comes in and I can hit play and they can watch their movie and hear the whole orchestra against it. And so that's the expectation in the last 15 years or so, is that to be competitive in this business, you have to invite them in, hit play, and just let the whole thing run. And it's a lot of work getting to that point. Not only are you coming up with the music, you have to program it out as close to like a real performance as you can physically get it to sound like. And then in just one click, it's yay or nay. And sometimes I'll get 6 measures into a 52 measure track. And then we're just, 20 or less seconds in and like, stop, click. And they're like, yeah, this isn't going anywhere that works for us. And it's like, wow, I spent the last 14 hours mocking this up. Like, no. Let's put a pin in that. Try something a little more like this or this. This is totally off the mark. And it's like, wow, there's like 50 more measures that you're not going to hear. It's like, you sure you don't want to go any further? Like, no, next. And it's like, okay. And they give me some notes on what I wasn't doing quite right. And sometimes I hit play and it's like, yeah, that's really great. Let's make a few fixes. And right in here, something's not working. And with filmmakers, and this isn't a knock on filmmakers, it's just the fact is they don't speak music. That's not their training. And you have to learn to take just colorful adjectives they'll use metaphors and stories to help get you to an emotional perspective to understand what may not be working, because they can't say, oh, second clarinet just isn't working with your voicing there. And what they're saying is, oh, the woodwinds are making it sound thick. Maybe if it was just more strings it'll feel better. And I'll say, hey, look, what if I tried this? And I'll mute out all the clarinets, oboes, bassoons, and woodwind stuff. And like, hey, what about this? And I won't explain what I did. It's just strings. And it's like, whoa, you know what? That is kind of working for me. And then I'll be like, well, there's this one melody that's kind of lost. What if I add that bassoon back in? Oh gosh, I don't know. Something just went wrong. And it's like, okay, mute it back out. Oh, that's great. And it's like, oh, cool. So the beauty of these mock-ups is now you've given a filmmaker more power to have a say in what the color and the music is going to do in their movie. And so instead of having to find out after they spent all the money at the session, they get to find out what works for them or doesn't way earlier. So when we get to the recording session, they're almost the co-composer, and they get to hear the full live version of something they've already approved. And then it's even more glorious when it's live. And I've never had happier clients than the ones who already approved personally everything I've written, and then they get to hear the live version. And so while it's more work for us to get to that point, filmmakers really are a little more in control of what happens in their music than they used to be. So there's something a little more powerful about it too. Yeah.
It does sound like a lot of work up front. But when you were explaining how you can drop certain sections out entirely or edit them on the fly right there, that's really cool. I would not have thought of that aspect of it. Because when you were at first talking about how you do all this work and they're like, nope, not interested. It's like, oh, you did the whole job just to be told no. But I guess
do it again.
It has its pros also. That's really fascinating.
Absolutely. There is that side to it. I resented it for a little while, thinking like, wow, where's the trust in this process? Yeah, but then, the more like A-list composers I was doing like orchestrations for, arranging for, I started to notice like I would go conduct for another composer. It was much, much farther along. And I would notice on the score I was about to conduct that it would say the version number of the track. And sometimes it was getting into like version 45, 46. And that's how many rewrites were going. And they did the mock-ups each time. And there's composers with like Oscar-winning composers who were like, oh yeah, they're like, and I was complaining like, gosh, I had to rewrite the song several times for this like student filmmaker, like who just is never happy with anything. I was like all upset about my little problem. And they're like, this one film we did, it's like there was maybe 85 minutes of music we ended up recording. And they're like, I did enough versions to have scored it at least 6 times over. They're like, that's a small problem. They're like, believe me, get used to doing that little one well, because it only scales out thousands of times.
Yeah.
And they're like, and you need to learn to handle that problem like that. Because if you want to do what I'm doing, they're like, you have no idea. I'm doing this 1,000 times more a day. So get faster and better. And I was like, oh, I see.
Yeah.
So I'm expecting the industry to bend to my personal preference, but it's like, no. The ship is going to sail. I need to learn how to keep up with what the demand really is. And that was just a major psychological shift. Yeah. This is the service I provide.
Yeah. A good lesson to learn on the smaller projects, because it's an exponential problem. The budgets get bigger, the timelines get smaller, the egos get bigger, or maybe not even ego, but it's like, no, it has to be this. This is a, $300 million project.
Yeah. Just because you're a big name composer doesn't mean your responsibility gets smaller or your life gets easier. In fact, like the bigger movies I got to be a part of the team on and watch composers navigate, it was so much worse than I think people give credit for. People always tell me, oh, well, one day you'll be as big as so-and-so or that, and you're just on easy street. But it's like, life gets so much harder. You said it exactly. Imagine the responsibility of a $300+ million budget. There's not fewer cooks in that kitchen. Like when I started to have my first meetings at like Disney or Fox or studios like that, when I was beginning to pick up a little more steam, I would always sit down and be, hey, I love your music. You seem like a cool guy to work with. Then immediately, so on the scale of $150 million to $300 million, how many of these things have you managed yet? And they're like, how are you going to manage our money if we do this? And I was like, that's a fine question. And it's not like, oh, where's the trust? I thought you said you liked my music, but it's not just about that. You're dealing in a real pressure cooker situation. Like Disney isn't going to find another $150 million to do something over. I mean, that was the budget for that thing, you know? And it's like, you're responsible for it, and you can really damage them if you're not ready for this. And instead of taking that question personally, I was like, you know what? That's a really good question. If it was my money, I would want to know how.
You'd also want it exactly the way you want it.
Yes. And you have to answer to a lot more people. Now it's not just the head of music. There's a lot of other studio executives, a way bigger array of producers. And, you know, then there's like the director. And I mean, there's so many more people who have a say in what you do. And I've noticed that climbing along is the people I answer to and the demands, everything scales a bit higher and higher with time, and nothing gets easier. It only gets scarier, but it also gets a lot more fun.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you also come in towards the end of the project where they've already had to deal with casting issues and setbacks and missing days, like all those problems have already on their shoulders.
Yeah. We're just at the last touch. We're just the last touches at the end. And that's also a great point, because everything is at its most stressful point for them. Yeah. Right. And the film is really coming together, and then they're seeing what really happened. It's like filmmakers go into a project trying to shoot one thing, but it evolves as they shoot and edit, you know, it always becomes something different than they set out for. And they're trying to make the most of what they have. Even on really big budget films, it's not like you get exactly what you set out for it. It changes along the way. And they're trying to make sense of what happened. It's a really vulnerable place to be. And music has a really undue influence on a film. It can really elevate a very good movie, and it can really destroy a great movie too. Like music can just really cheapen anything if done improperly. And the pressure to get that right is kind of immense. But the thing I've noticed with filmmakers is when you really tap in to the sound they're looking for, you've run into something where suddenly they're like, oh my God, that's the music in my movie. They just know that was it. Like that thread, whatever that little, even if it's two measures. So like in that 5 seconds, I heard the music for my film right there. And it's like this powerful moment. And it's like, okay, here, I'm going to grab that and I'm going to expand that. Let's pick a scene. I'm going to grow that into a larger song. I'm going to do a little second demo for you here. And I'll expand it. And like, yeah, that's the right direction. Can we change this and this? And I'm like, cool. I'm going to take those notes and I'm going to reshape it. And suddenly we're finding the soundtrack in their movie. And once you really find once you really finish that little back and forth process, suddenly they see that there's this light at the end of the tunnel. They're like, oh my God, it's going to happen. I'm happy with this thing. And I think I get to be in that point right near the end where they're still not sure. And seeing the music work is one of those things where you see the stress really begin to fall off a little bit. And like, oh my God, my movie works. That's it. And then a score is just like that touch that brings that deep emotional subtext back out of a film. And suddenly you can connect a little more deeply to a character once there's a theme that grows and evolves with them. Suddenly all of that stuff just surfaces, and the color in the movie changes a little because of the influence of the music. And suddenly they realize like, oh my God, we're going to finish this thing. It's going to happen. And you get to watch them go through that transition at the end of that. For me, that's one of the most gratifying things. It's not just the music. It's sort of the overall, everyone is getting them to the finish line and you see them believe it's going to happen for the first time. And for me, that's one of my favorite moments too.
That's very cool. So it's high stakes, but the reward is a good payoff as much as it's scary.
Yes, absolutely.
It almost seems insane that the music comes last because it's so iconic, but I don't know how else do you watch the movie and score to it? You know, it has to be done. But any major franchise, you hear it as much as you see it when you remember it.
Right.
That's whole new perspective.
Everything you need is just right there in the picture, though. You know, one thing I've just noticed over the years is a lot of people who try to get into film music usually think about it as a way to be like a different sort of rock star. Like, yeah, I'm going to come in and be the next John Williams, or they're looking to be a name, when really it's like no one wants to work with that person. You meet John Williams or Hans Zimmer or the big names in there, and these are the most humble servants to a film you've ever met. It's not about them at all. I mean, and their backgrounds were a lot more similar to mine than I realized. That I was just obsessed with movies, and all I wanted to do was just be a servant to the picture to make it what it needs to be. Because, you know, as you go through this business, you realize your future and your success isn't wrapped up in your music. It's wrapped up in how the film succeeds. Nobody cares about a score to a movie no one saw, right? And that does nothing to advance what you do. Your goal is to make that movie the greatest movie it can be, because your next job depends on that movie doing well. So it's not about you. If you want to be a rock star, this is not the right business. Like, you are a lowly, you know, collaborator. Not that lowly in the sense you're not important, but it's everything comes from the picture. And if you are not dialed in to what that movie needs, you're not obsessing about how to connect, you know, the arc of a character from here to that point, how the theme needs to evolve and what it's going to be, and test it at that tune at different tempos, and test it romantically, sad, heroic, stretch it out for a long time, make it go by really quick. Does that theme really fit everything that character needs? And then how about this other character? Or sometimes you need a theme for something you can't even see, like maybe fate is a presence in the movie. And how do you make that fate theme and that character's theme interplay? You know, and you really need to make this experience as rich for the audience as possible. And if that's not how you're thinking about your music, like writing a score, like the actual music on paper is the last thing you do. The first 10 things you do have nothing to do with music. It's really just about the story in the movie. And if that's not what you really prize the most, film music shouldn't be your career. I just happen to write music, but really film is like what I care about. And then the more you get to know people farther ahead of you, the more you realize that that was their obsession as well. Is it's all about story to them, and I'm serving the picture.
Yeah.
So yeah,
that's awesome. And that kind of ties back into how we started, where you didn't set out to be the next this guy. You just wanted to make music for movies. And I think if you did try to be this guy, you would be one of those that you mentioned, where you're 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000. And if you don't play ball, then they're just going to grab the next name out of the hopper, and it's that person, because no one's going to know. Yeah.
There's no honor, you know, getting replaced on something that you, or even getting a job where you are that replaceable. I think that was like, I was having there was a lot of years where I was having a lot of dissonance about, why do I feel so lousy doing this? I thought all I really wanted was just to get started and get these jobs. But then I was like, why do I not enjoy this so much? It's not what I thought it was going to be. And I realized it was just that. It's like, oh, I'm not contributing anything. In fact, I'm not even doing a good job. I'm not even able to really serve everything this movie needs, because I'm being pinned in to a sound that's not even right for this film. I'm not even able to say, hey, your movie's actually pretty good and it needs something better than this. It's like I didn't even have that much power. And it was like, oh, I'm just not a good film composer when I'm doing this. I'd rather not score this film than just leave behind another thing that just sounds like somebody else. Like, no, I think I'm done with that. I'd rather just probably write nothing than do that. Because there's plenty of ways I could make music. But luckily, the more you find, it's like with anything in life, the more you really find something unique to do, the more people show up out of nowhere to seek it out. Yeah. And it was the best thing I'd ever done, was to go through a period where I just stepped away, which I did for a while. I just stopped. And then suddenly no work was coming in. And I thought, if this is what it's going to mean, then I'll just write music for other people and do other things. And during that time, I was actually getting pulled in to do a lot of theme park music. And I launched kind of a second career doing a lot of theme park rides and stuff. And they were like, do whatever you feel like, this park is yours. And they were just like, you know, because their attitude was just, we already like your stuff, so we don't know how to direct you, just make magic with music. And I was just really off the leash, and I just kind of fell into theme parks for several years. And later on, film came back to me just on my own terms. And the more that started the more people started coming back to me, the faster my career back in film accelerated. And it's never been moving so fast. And I just decided it was just going to be on those sorts of terms from now on. So
that's awesome that it worked out for you.
Yeah.
I'm
Maybe
also
just lucky.
It could be, but you've been working at it since you were a young teenager, so I don't think it's just luck. I'm also glad you brought up the theme park thing, because when I saw that you scored a theme parks, I was like, what does that even mean? But so it sounds like it means, hey, make this place more fun.
Yeah, usually like people who are developing a park or like a new set of attractions within a bigger theme park, like, hey, we're developing an experience like this. It's going to be this new section of a park. We're going to have a couple rides that do this. We have some walkthroughs. Then we have this enchanted town. And there's this forest people walk through. And some of these need really precise timings on a ride. The forest needs just kind of an ambient thing that happens, or there's like like when I was doing the scores for Los Angeles Haunted Hayride, it was like, okay, we have this ride, and every time the tractor's lights cross a beam up here, it'll trigger a new musical cue, and it takes that tractor exactly this much time to arrive and stop at this point. And then there's all this pyrotechnics go off, and actors come out swinging out, and they terrorize everyone. And then we need a bumper for when that happens. And then there's going to be a pause, and then an evil nun with a ruler comes out, but on the back there's going to be a trigger. And when she says her line, she hits the trigger, and then more fire goes off, and that'll cue your next cue. And so we're like timing all of these little intricate moments, and some of them are automated, but some of them are controlled live. You have to build these. So it was like scoring film, except you're not hitting frames. You're just like, okay, this one scene out of 14 different scenes along this ride needs not just an automated thing, but it needs a second automated show control moment, and then a physically controlled one. And as the cart begins to leave, it triggers the final one. And so you had to plan all this stuff ahead of time, and you have to deliver music in these stages and dramatically time it out to what was going on in the scene, more down to the second than the frame, fractions of a second. And sometimes it was like, hey, we have this ride, we're just gonna lull through one zone, we just need ambient music. And then the next scene you ride through, it's going to be ambient until someone triggers this thing, and then it's going to be coordinated in a song. People come out singing or whatever. And so it was this weird world of like immersive environments, and no one ride or theme park scene is ever alike. And the question isn't just like dramatic, oh, what's the sound? What's this world like? What experience are we creating? But it's like, how are we immersing people in each of these moments? Like, what should the music do? Should the music actually blend in and kind of be part of a trippy environment where we're going to set up like 10 different speaker points and different bits of music float around you in different ways? Is it going to be in motion? Like, so you get to ask all those kinds of questions. And I just fell in love with that. So I'm still doing a lot of theme park stuff these days because I just can't let it go.
It sounds impossibly difficult from an outside perspective, but it sounds really cool. And like, I'll never walk through a place like that and hear a little bit of music and just not think about it again.
Yeah. Well, somebody's behind the scenes having really thought about what your experience is going to be in that moment.
Yeah.
Like, how do we set this world, and
like you
how
said,
is it
down
going
to
to play?
With the bumper.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I know we're running a little bit long, but we should probably talk about Haymaker, your latest film.
Sure.
How did that come about?
Yeah, well, I had been doing a little bit of work with I think he's the executive producer, Andrew Vandenhout. And Andrew was like, hey, there's this movie I'm producing. He's like, I really think you should score this one. He was like, talk to the filmmaker. I think you'll see why. I'll just leave it to you two. I thought, oh, that's interesting. I was like, I don't know what could he possibly hear in my writing and this guy's filmmaking where he thinks we should sit down together. And all he told me was, the director's name is Nick Sasso. He's making a movie called Haymaker. I've set up an appointment for you two in a few weeks. And I happened to be out of town at that point. And we just had a little like Skype or Zoom meeting. and just chatted. And I was thinking Haymaker. And so through my life, I've trained and competed in Muay Thai, the martial art, and it's also the national sport in Thailand. And it's just always been one of the other great loves of my life is this practice in this martial art. And I was thinking, oh, Haymaker. I was like, it's probably some historical piece about an Amish farmer, throwing hay, and maybe it's an epic romance. Like my mind was going off that direction, preparing for this thing. And I was thinking, it's funny because it sounds like, just a Hail Mary, messy punch. A Haymaker's just like, you just throw a crazy wide swing, right? And not something you try to do in martial arts, but anyway, so I sit down, online with Nick, and I see he's got this hat on. I'm like, hey, wait, before we get going, I was like, is that hat from the North Hollywood Muay Thai gym? He's like, oh yeah, you know the place? I'm like, yeah, I was training there for years. He's like, oh yeah, I train Muay Thai as well. And he's like, oh, what do you know? And he was like, well, that works for this film. And I thought, oh, what do you mean? And he was like, well, this film is about Muay Thai. I was like, whoa, what? And then he was like, yeah, and he's like, I'm really glad you understand what this martial art is. He's like, it was important to me to work with somebody who has a sense for this. And he was like, what I'm also looking for is somebody who understands like orchestral writing or understands how to write for strings well. And I'm like, dude, I was like, I'm a trained cellist. I was like, I think I can handle that. And then we just hit it right off. And he was like, okay, I think we're in business here. Let's do this movie. And then we didn't chat for a bit because he had to go back to Thailand for a few months, do some more pickup shots and a little more filming. And comes back. He was sending me footage that they were picking up along the way, and I was getting some visuals for what he was seeing over there, and it was just remarkable. And it was really feeding me a lot of great ideas. And and we had our first creative chat about what the score needs to be once he put a first assembly together. And I remember he was like, I think I know what this movie needs. And it's something like, it was like, I think I want more of a violin concerto than a film score. He was like, instead of hitting every little thing that happens and syncing it up too tight, he was like, I want the music to just exist above the movie. And it's like this concert piece that just plays no matter what the movie's doing. And it's like this voice that calls to something ahead. He's like, in fact, the music probably won't even make sense till at least halfway through the movie, why that sound is there. Because we're going to get to this point halfway through and realize what the main character was being called to. And that violin melody is going to be there waiting for us. And then we'll all understand why from the beginning of the movie we were hearing that sound. Because the film opens, we're in this club scene, and this bouncer has to interrupt this assault going on. But time is suspended and slow, and you would not think this like solo classical violin music should be over that scene. And it's a little disorienting. And he was like, yeah, it's okay. Later, we're going to know why that music belonged here. And I thought, man, that is a beautiful concept. And then when we tried it out, it really worked on picture. And so this is one of those cases where he was like, man, leash is off. Just write this concerto for a film. And I sketched some things out. We dialed in on a sound, and then a tune came along that he really responded to. That became the main theme. And then I just structured the whole score around that. And just instead of doing lots of little sub themes and hitting every little thing in every scene, only when we would go into these deep introspective moments, this mysterious bed of shimmering strings and voices would kind of come into. This violin solo would just take over the dialogue in place of dialogue, and it just did the narrating. And that was kind of how that went. Yeah.
That's awesome. It could not be a better fit for you.
It's probably one of the best ever for me. I've never worked on something where I was so intimately connected to every aspect of the film and the score.
Right, and you and the director hit it off in like the first minute of talking, so it's like, how can you do better than that?
Yeah.
Do you know when the movie's out and all that?
Yeah, it did have a theatrical release, meaning maybe there's a theater somewhere.
Yeah, whatever theaters happen to be open.
Yeah. And it's released on all video demand sites. In fact, so the day it came out was January 29th. So it's been out for a few weeks. And that night, I wanted to just officially, since we can't do a big premiere event, My wife and I rented it on Amazon, even though I have a copy. Right. We still went. We're like, hey, look, it's on Amazon, and we just watched it. And the soundtrack came out last Friday.
Very cool. Yeah. That's awesome. I could pick your brain all day. This is a whole new world for me, but I know we went a little long. I don't want to hold you up, but I really appreciate you coming on. That was awesome.
Oh, good. Well, I hope it was at least interesting for somebody to listen to.
Oh, for sure. I'm sure people are going to be into it. Yeah. Anyone who's into movie making or movie watching is going to get insight from this. So.
Oh, good.
Where can people find you and your work online?
I don't know. Just come to my website. That's christhomasmusic.com.
Okay. That'll be the best place.
Yeah. I have information about stuff like that going on. And I'm about to get the update for a link to the album's almost up there too. So my last couple features, those albums are out now. And I think the Haymaker album link is just about up. So
nice.
That'll be there too.
All right. We'll definitely direct people. ChrisThomas.com, you said?
Yes, Chris Thomas Music.
ChrisThomasMusic.com, sorry. Okay, well, once again, thank you. That was fascinating. If you have another project you want to talk about, let's do it again.
Sure, I've got all kinds of stuff going on. Yeah. I'll make sure it's worth your time. It's been a wacky couple months. Like I worked on this thing, this little short film up in Central Oregon, and worked with the local symphony on putting the music together for it. And of all the things, I've had 3 features come out since the pandemic started, 2 theatrical and 1 for PBS. And then I have this little short film. And of all these films that have been out there, with these wider releases, this little short film called Imagine Symphony Live ends up winning a Hollywood Music and Media Award last month. And I was just like, what?
Congratulations.
So, all of us in Central Oregon. In fact, actually, I'm at my Central Oregon office right now. I've been spending most of the pandemic not in Los Angeles. And I live part-time up here in Oregon. And
probably a better place to be right now.
just to avoid people. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, so while I was here, I was like, let's do this little project. And that was the one that probably made the biggest splash this last year of everything. So that was fun. But
that's awesome. Yeah. Well, congratulations and thank you again. This has been wonderful.
Cool. Yeah. Well, it's really good to meet you. And
you too.
Yeah. Hope to chat again someday.
Definitely. Take care.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
I want to thank Christopher Thomas one more time for coming on the show and talking to us. Like I said before, incredibly interesting to talk to. I am hearing movies in an all-new way. Look at the guy's, his resume. He has worked on everything. I guarantee you have heard something of his before. Very cool guy. Make sure you like and subscribe. We have a ton more interviews like this and a ton more new movie coverage coming your way. Also, make sure you listen to So Wizard Podcast every single week wherever you get your podcasts. SoWizardPodcast.com is your resource for reviews, recommendations, merchandise, videos, and more. So Wizard Podcast can also be found on Patreon, where for as little as $1 a month, you get multiple monthly bonus shows for it. And we love hearing feedback, so drop us a note in the comments or leave us something on social media. Thanks.